to welcome Steve Lawson to teach today for us. Steve, as you can see from his website, is a musician. So the whole theme today is music and e-commerce, music and the internet. And Steve is a particular master at using social media and all the capabilities, affordances of the internet to support his career. So, Steve, off you go. Tell us all about what you do.
Yes, yeah. I guess my sort of the historical context of my solo work is kind of key to understanding why I do what I do now. I studied music back in the early 90s, came out of college, and started along the path towards what a sort of conventional session music career. I wasn't an artist as such. I was playing for other people. I had a bunch of skills that I would go out and get paid per gig to play with other artists. Towards the end of the 90s, I started writing for a national music magazine, bassist, by meeting the editor in the shop and just saying, give me a job. They're going, oh, okay. Backing away slowly. And so I started writing for them, but that gave me a platform from which to start experimenting with the idea of being an artist and performing. And that because the magazine were involved with a lot of trade shows, I would go to trade shows and demo equipment, which is quite a sort of gentle way to get into performing in front of people as a solo artist, which as a bass player is still weird. It was particularly strange back then. Telling people you played bass on your own was like telling them that you made your own shoes. Like, really? It's a bit odd. It's become much more popular now because of some of the things we'll get into. But because of my work as a journalist, I realised that the economic proposition around recorded music for people doing niche things like I was doing was appalling. That the most successful people within the kind of the bracket that I was operating, none of them were making any money out of recordings at all. All the money that was being generated by their recordings was going to the shop that was selling the CDs, the distributor that was shipping them out around the world. This is pre-web sales. And the record label themselves, who were accumulating cash and using various clever marketing tricks, various accounting tricks, to make sure that each of those projects never ever went into black, so they never had to pay any royalty to the artists. So all of the artists just started from the assumption that they weren't going to make any money off of recordings. Most of them were selling between probably 5 and 20,000 copies of each album. The people in that particular sort of bass-featured instrumental music bracket. But they'd all grown up with the assumption that they were never going to make any money from that, and that the purpose of that was that it gave their career some reach, and they would make money playing live, or through other kind of ancillary endorsement deals and sponsorship. I wasn't happy with that at all. That didn't strike me as being a decent way of valuing or appreciating the work that I was doing as a performer. And I also saw that to get from where I was at that point to that level would have required an awful lot of creative capitulation to the desires of the label, because all of those people were doing a certain thing that you could see was being artistically squeezed into a marketable bracket. I wasn't interested in doing it. For whatever reason, I felt quite contrary in response to that. I thought I needed to come up with a different way of doing it. So this was late 90s. I already had a website. I remember the moment when I realised that because I didn't come from a computer science background, so I came into the web initially from a sort of pure consumer level. I was looking at corporate sites and using big search engines and whatnot. And the point at which I realised that with Notepad and some free photo editing software that I got on the cover of a magazine, I could build my own website was amazing. Because at that point I didn't have anything to sell, but I certainly had a message I wanted to get across. I wanted to have a conversation with people about music. So that was already established, and at that point, I mean, if we think of the web now as the World Wide Web, in 1998 it was like the Isle of Wight. There was about 8 people online across the entire planet, and I was talking to all of them. But because I was a musician who had his own website, and there were very few of those, I had a captive market. So at the point when I was considering what to do with releasing music, and having already discounted this idea of trying to get a record deal, I was able to do what was an awful lot of nascent market research by talking to people who were already kind of present within my world. That I was a member of a number of different mailing lists and discussion groups, and so this unfolding process of me developing the kind of economic sustainability around the creative project happened in conversation with my audience. I had no idea at the time how unusual that was as a setup. I didn't do it because I was doing a marketing course and thought I was a genius. I did it because that was sort of the obvious thing to do as it unfolded. So I looked into the cost of pressing CDs. Again, this is all pre-iTunes, pre-web sales. I looked into the cost of pressing CDs and realised that I could make 1,000 CDs for about 1,800 quid with really nice packaging. Because I was also aware that if I was going to do it on my own, I needed that the value-added aspect of it, that I couldn't do mundane product. That as a niche market, again, this wasn't that I'd done a marketing or economics course. It was just obvious that niche things always needed to kind of have that feel to them. That doing the Tesco's value version of music wasn't going to help, because the only value of that was in volume and low pricing, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't meet that kind of demand. So if I was pressing 1,000 CDs, I was willing to spend about 40% extra on the kind of unit cost on each of those in order to make it special, because I knew that was the difference between people choosing to buy it or not. And certainly on a tape table at a gig, which was my main kind of outlet to actually sell to people, that would have made the difference between buying and not buying. So I realised that I then needed to sell approximately 200 of them to break even, and that if I did that, that only worked if I'd done the recording myself, mixing and mastering, artwork, design, and all of it. Unless I was in charge of that entire chain. As soon as I had to pay anyone else, the number at which I had to sell in order to break even had gone up. All the things which are really obvious, but I was kind of discovering as I went along, because I didn't come at this as someone who wanted to start a business. I came at this as an artist who wanted to make the production of art sustainable. And that understanding that those two sides of the equation is really key. Certainly if you're thinking of it if you're coming at it from the business side, understanding the impetus that causes people to create the thing that you're trying to sell in the first place, having a sensitivity to that could be the difference between your venture being successful or not. Because I've had a lot of people come to me and say, oh, I know how you can make loads more money than coming up with some weird scam that involves me making terrible music. And I think that you clearly haven't actually spent any time trying to understand what it is I do, and I just felt misunderstood and disrespected by that. So the development of what I did as a cottage industry wasn't an ideological thing. It wasn't that I felt that working entirely on my own was an important thing to do. It was just, at that point, it was an economic necessity. I wasn't sure enough of my potential market in order to start to invest in bringing in other people to increase those things. And so I spent an awful lot of time experimenting. I developed my fairly basic desktop publishing skills were I was constantly testing, making multiple versions of the album art a day and ditching them and showing them to people and saying, can you help me with this? And my partner at the time, she was a journalist and worked in Quark all day long, so she helped me with some of the kind of more edgy things like that. And so there was an element of the sort of gift economy in that people were supporting what I was doing. But getting to that point was a series of happy accidents and then responses to those. So first album broke even in 2 months, but from that I gathered a whole bunch of user data. I worked out where the people were that were interested in buying it, how the conversations went that led to people buying it. And so when the second album came out, I was able to pitch it differently, do a pre-sale on the album and break even before it came out. So I never accumulated any debt over the second CD. Again, it was a limited run of 1,000 copies. And so I got fairly good at managing that kind of scarce economy production and sales process. And as the tech got better, so initially it was a case of getting people to actually download and print out a sales form and send me a check, which was it's quite a high demand. I mean, I can't imagine trying to make anybody do that these days at all. So I was really surprised at the number of people who did, but because there wasn't any alternative, that was what we did. And then as PayPal came along, there were PayPal buttons. I had a friend actually who set up a web shop for his own music and allowed me to sell mine on there. So I was able to take credit card fulfillment online via him and pay him a percentage to cover his costs and a little bit extra. But I didn't have to encode that myself. But PayPal changed everything. It was the first point at which you could do sort of one click to do that. And then, and as my product base grew, and the potential for bundling digital versions of things with physical products came along, I got interested in various open source e-commerce solutions. Have any of you come across either OS Commerce or ZenCart? They're two kind of sort of WordPress-like CMSs for sales. And they're both open source, and they're both infinitely editable and horrible. And so I built these really elaborate e-commerce solutions because I thought that was what I was meant to do, that in order to look slightly more slick, I would have this. But what that gave me was the option to start selling digital versions of things. And so because it allowed you to bundle files, and I could sell a zip file of an album. And immediately, the fact that the disappearance of the unit cost in there, and the fact that I could then start to price things lower, became hugely attractive. That by this point, iTunes was on the scene, and a small American company called CD Baby, which had started out as the web shop of one artist, but he'd done the same as what this friend of mine did, and invited his friends to sell alongside him, had managed to negotiate a group deal with iTunes to get independent music onto iTunes. So iTunes initially started out as they only had a deal with each of the majors. They then established a deal with each of the large independents, but it meant that iTunes was colonized by mainstream music. There was no space within it in its initial proposition for niche or independent music. CD Baby negotiated a deal with them that allowed for this enormous influx of albums into there. So CD Baby at that point were probably handling, I don't know, 100,000 independent artists. It's way north of that now. But they negotiated this one deal where they would act as conduit, and they would make sure the encoding was right. Because the reason that iTunes didn't want to deal with it was that the amount of dirty data they would have ended up with broken metadata and dodgy files, and having to do the customer service side of that. That's not what Apple does at all. They weren't interested in that. They were interested in this mechanized shop that was about them having presence within everybody's operating system. So they didn't want to have to support they weren't interested in being in the kind of e-commerce business in that way. It was about colonization. So CD Baby offered them a really simple service. They said, we'll do all of that customer service support for you. But what it meant was that where I was on my own web shop, it was people were coming there through my website. It was branded as my website. That all the conversation on there, all of the text was in the first person. It was me talking to them about myself. And there was a very strong sense of them buying from me. With iTunes, all of that was obfuscated. I didn't know who was buying. I had no way of editing the text around the album. I had no way of editing my artist bio, or there was no web link, there was no link back to my website. So it was an entirely depersonalized process. So at that point, and this again favored the major label thing because they were the ones who had the marketing budget. At that point, I was basically on conceptually on the same level as all the kind of the heavily marketed huge bands, which meant that most of the independents got ignored. There's a stat kicking around somewhere online about the number of albums that are on iTunes that have never been bought. Open source things designed by committee, and nobody was actually streamlining it. But I had this taste of what it was to not only complete a sale, but to start forming a relationship with the customer, and for them to feel some kind of level of apparent emotional investment in what I was doing. Because, and this was the bit where it got really interesting, they would invariably email me to thank me for the music. So they paid for it. That's gratitude enough. I don't tend to go back to shops and thank them for selling stuff to me. But this was happening time and time again. That people were buying it, but they were feeling the need and the desire to express that in another way. And there were three ways that people would do that. One is they would talk to me. They would say thank you. I really like what you do. Second is they would buy it, and the third is they would share it and talk about it elsewhere. And again, it was an emerging sense. It wasn't that I sat down and tried to strategize all this. It was an emerging sense that was a sort of a three-pronged transactional economy that was forming. That by getting caught up on just finance as the only economy that mattered, that the friends of mine who were obsessed with going, oh, but you can't make enough money per album if you do it that way, were completely lost in this world where they ignored the fact that the people who were selling CDs back in the 90s that I've been interviewing were making nothing. They were happy because their albums were selling for £15 in boutique shops. That fed their ego, and it gave them a kind of, there was a sort of exclusive branding to that. But they themselves were making nothing from this. They were given an advance to make the record, and then nothing beyond that. And that never fit with what I wanted to do. The point at which everything changed, and it's kind of, I think we'll probably focus on this a bit, is when an e-commerce solution was built called Bandcamp. Have any of you come across Bandcamp before? Heard of Bandcamp? Let me show you. There's the front page of my Bandcamp site. You'll notice it looks exactly the same as my website. The URL is even music.stevelawson.net. Bandcamp was developed after a guy in California called Ethan Diamond, who had built the original mail app that became Yahoo Mail. So he was a first-generation .com millionaire. He made enough to buy a nice house in San Francisco and set himself up. He's not living on a yacht, but he has a fairly reasonable life and was looking for a new project. And he read an e-book by a New Zealand academic based in Birmingham called Andrew Dover, called 20 Things You Need to Know About Music Online, or something like that. I'll find out what the exact name was. Which had somewhere in the region of 750,000 downloads as a free PDF. The ebook, it defined in sort of 2006, 2007, it defined the way that people started thinking about, changing the way they were thinking about music online. And Ethan read that and thought, there isn't a single interface that actually puts any of this into practice. And so they built it, and counter to all of the prevailing wisdom at the time, they made it so that every single thing on there was streamable and full. There we go. So both of those tracks that we could play, is there any sound on this?
Yeah.
There's no 30-second previews on there. You can't set that up if you want to. I've seen a couple of people try. I've seen people upload a version of the album that is all 30-second previews and then have the rest of it hidden. Those people are known as dickheads. Because what Ethan recognised, and this is really important from an understanding the unique positioning of a product of any kind, is that he realised that unique amongst all the arts was that people were more likely to buy music that they'd spend a lot of time with than less. So I tend not to buy films that I've watched a lot of times. I tend to buy a film in order to watch it the first time. I tend to buy a book in order to read it. With music, I quite often I've spent a lot of time with it before I go, I need to own this. It's unique amongst the arts in that way, that there are things that I've listened to for 20 years that I finally got around to buy. We have a very different relationship with music than we do with all the other arts. And so what Ethan realised was that what we needed was an interface within which people could fall in love with music, and then the discussion around the value of it was done with knowledge on either side, rather than trying to hide something and go, you want this music, don't you? I'll let you get 30 seconds of it and then you can buy it. And that general disappointment that people have always expressed across the history of music with albums that had 3 great singles and a bunch of filler. It's like, let's get rid of that. Let's actually build a thing that, one of the affordances of Bandcamp is that it encourages artists to make consistently good records. Because people can come in and hear the whole thing and go, actually that's all crap, I only want those 2 songs. and because of the fear within the major record labels that they saw digital as being, rather than as being a great way of building an audience, they saw it as letting go of their stranglehold on the supply chain. So they wanted 30-second previews, they wanted DRM. DRM stands for Digital Rights Management. It's the thing that stops you from with early iTunes, you couldn't copy any of the files that you bought, or you couldn't share them with someone else. You needed to be logged into an account. They kept a stranglehold on that. One of the weird things, just as a side point, is to compare, if you fancy a kind of research project, is to compare the way that the music industry entirely failed to convince consumers that DRM was good, but the games industry has managed to do it and turn it into their main marketing tool, is that everything is locked down to a particular platform. There's never been a kind of mass consumer boycott of gaming that said you need to make all of these cross-platform. You buy an Xbox game, you can't play it on a PlayStation, you can't put it in a PC, you're stuck with it. You can't copy it to a friend unless you're really clever. But whereas with music, there was an immediate kind of reaction to that. People went, we don't want this. We want it to be open. We want it to be sharing, because music has always been a thing that people share. People turn up at someone's house with a pile of records and play them to them. So within Bandcamp, Ethan recognised that was needed to do, but he also realised that fairly obvious point that I made about my own workshop, which is that with every single click, there was more. There was an attrition rate in terms of people's kind of involvement in the buying process, and they would all fall away. So 2% of the people who started my process would end because there were 7 pages they had to go through. So one of the nice things about Bandcamp is that they've got rid of all of that. It's a matter of on any of the links you click buy, you type in your amount, you click check out now, it just logs you into PayPal and you're done. So if you have your PayPal details saved in the browser, there's no typing at all, which is really nice. There's one other element before I'll pause for questions to see if you've got anything so far that was really nice about the way they did this. And again, this was unique amongst any conversation, which was this. Interesting bit, it was those 2 words there, no minimum. So if I put my music on iTunes, not only can I not edit the description, the artwork, any of that stuff, I also can't change the price. I'm stuck with the fixed price there, which is $7.99 for an album. On Bandcamp, I get to decide exactly what each album should cost, and I get to then decide whether or not it should be a minimum price above which people can choose to pay more if they want to invest in what I'm doing. And I can set the price at 0 if I want, so that if somebody wants to type in a 0, if you want my entire back catalogue, you can go in and get almost all of it for nothing on there, just by typing in a bunch of zeros and downloading them. And some people do that. But what's interesting is the kind of relationship that sets up between me and the people, my listeners. I'm not comfortable with fans in this, so my listeners. Is that they then have, there is a thought process that is set in motion around the value proposition in music. That is more than just, I want this album, this is how much it costs, will I pay it? It's, this album is available for free, why would I pay for it? And by putting that into their heads, I get to rob them of any narrative of me being a greedy capitalist by wanting to charge for music. So anybody who comes in who has this sort of freedom approach to music, says, oh, all music should be free. I can go, that's bullshit, but anyway, if you want it for free, you can have it. We'll have the conversation about why what you're saying is rubbish, someone else, but if you want it for free, just take it. But it also means that people who are broke can get it. And we're living in a fairly major recession right now. And the idea that the people who were comfortable paying $7.99 for an album on iTunes in 2006 should be equally comfortable with that now, given that salaries are plummeting across whole sectors and loads, that's nuts. So there's an enormous amount of economic activity below that price point that could happen. And if I try and second guess it by saying everything's £2, I miss out on the potential for people to pay more. But if I put £2 or more, then I've established what I think the base value of what I'm doing is. I've decided that there should be a unit cost to an album. And this is going to be part 2 of the talk, is why that's nonsense. So I set it at 0 so that I have a totally different kind of conversation with my end users. Now, so the key things about this is that I'm able to mess with pricing. The messing with pricing is not just about the money, it's about the conversation around it. But the reason I can have that is that this is a solution where the company behind it, for the most part, Bandcamp, is entirely transparent. You're not buying music from Bandcamp, you're buying it from me. That they've set it up so I can brand it entirely like my own site. There's a uniformity of the flow in it, and the basic page layout is the same. Whoever page we go to on Bandcamp, let me find one more just so you can see how little there is in it. There we go. So their front page is basically, then they can change the size and the size of the grid, but the grid is there with the information on the side. And on any one album you click on, the layout is the same. What was that? Because I know you're all distracted by my brilliance, so I won't leave that way. Any questions at this point, or comments? Yes.
Using Bandcamp and the uniformity of it, does that not stifle your creativity in terms of your online presence?
No, because it's not the entirety of my online presence. It's a really good question. And one of the nice things about this is, again, this is again part of the purposefulness of what they're doing here, is that Bandcamp stuff is embeddable anyway. So when you go to the front page of my site, there you've got 2 Bandcamp embeds. So again, you can play the whole album from there, you can buy the album from there. The interface is such that you can, that embed can be of a variety of different sizes and scales. There's a uniformity to it because what we learned from MySpace is that musicians in general are bloody awful designers. And that 70% of MySpace pages became unreadable, let alone, kind of just awkward to navigate. That all those glittery backgrounds and falling rain and God knows what else nonsense people put on their MySpace pages. That actually, for the most part, designing a set of elements like this that are both malleable but uniform enough to stop people from breaking them, that's a really, really clever skill. And one of the beautiful things that Bandcamp does is that they tend to take their time over this stuff. There's a big conversation going on all the time. I wish Bandcamp would hurry up with X, Y, Z, but they don't do the Apple version, which is to put out a broken OS and fix it 3 weeks later. Bandcamp tend to wait 6 months, wait for everybody else to make a mistake, and then go, now here's the best version. And they're always are. And every time they put anything out, we were like, oh, we weren't expecting that. Okay, that's fantastic. There's a wonderful element that we'll get to in there in a moment. But yeah, so no, because it's not the entire show, but also, I mean, there is an awful lot I can do there. That because it conforms to certain kinds of design standard. So that the top bar there, the difference in colour is because I recently changed the colour on my site and I haven't changed that image. That's actually a single image and that I screen grabbed off my own site with an image map attached to it, so I can click on each element of it. So it looks the same, but it's just an image. But yeah, the height of that can change. I can change the colour of the background, the colour of the text. But that uniformity, it's certainly in a shopping environment, is really useful. Because one of the things I spent an awful lot of time on when I first got on Bandcamp was educating my audience about its benefits. I didn't just post a link and say my stuff's on Bandcamp instead of iTunes. Because everybody would go, I'm comfortable with iTunes, I know that. Getting people to change their point of supply for anything is really hard. It's a high intensity, high energy input process. And so I needed to keep making the case for why Bandcamp was better for them and better for me. And there were a number of points that I would stress, one of which is that the audio is lossless. So for the audio file, again, understanding my demographic and having had that conversation with them early on was really important to this. I understood a large number of my listeners really cared about that stuff. So all the files that there is the option within the completion process on Bandcamp to download a file that's significantly higher in quality than CD. You get a 24-bit audio file of my stuff. And there are a bunch of people who will buy it because of that. They kind of the music is almost secondary to the quality, which is ridiculous. It's a really stupid reason to buy music. I'm still glad to save their money. But so I did that, and the fact that they get to pay less or more if they want to, I get a higher percentage of that money. The money comes to me straight away. There's a lovely thing about this, is because of the way they've set up the accounting on it, and we'll probably talk about this a bit more this afternoon, because there's a couple of changes to tax law that could screw this majorly coming in the new year. But one of the nice things is that if you buy on Bandcamp, take 15% of your income until you've made $5,000 in a year, and then it drops to 10%. And the way they work it is that when someone buys something, the PayPal goes straight to you. So I get a PayPal notification the moment they do it. And then and into a kind of an imaginary totalizer goes the percentage of that I owe Bandcamp. So they're keeping a running total of how much I owe them. When a sale comes in that is below that total, they take that. They just the PayPal goes to them instead. So there is no, so their control over that process is just a switch. That either the money comes to me or it goes to them. They don't collect it and pay me at the end of the month, which is really nice because it means that on a day when I'm broke, and this is another one of those key sort of marketing things, I can actually say, oh, I've got bills coming up today, anybody want to buy any music? Which, now framing that and how you word that to make it sound like it's fun rather than begging is really tricky. I've seen the musicians get it completely wrong. But I've also paid bills that way. laptop got stolen. I mentioned it with a link to my web shop, just kind of jokingly, and I covered half the cost of the laptop in an hour. And my normal web sales for that day would have been 20, 25 quid probably, and I made 400 in an hour from people going, oh, I'll buy, and coming in and buying a single album and paying 50 quid for it. So it allows me to muddy the water between it being a shopping transaction, because it's such a nice shopping interface that people who want to do that can just come in and go, $7.99, that's what I would normally pay for an album, I'll put that in, it's done. But people who want to see it as shopping as communication can do that as well. So they express an increased sense of value and gratitude in what I do by paying a higher price and sending me a message. Because when you click on that button, there's the option to, once you put the money in, it says include include a message with this. So you type in your amount, you click through, and it says, do you want to include a message? So you can actually type, and most people do. They'll say thanks. But yeah, I've never thanked Amazon for anything. The only time I've emailed Amazon is to tell them to stop sending me stuff. Other questions? Yes.
What are the main ways you drive people to your website?
That's a really good question. So an enormous amount of it comes from social networks, from Twitter and Facebook that I have. Just over 10,000 Twitter followers. But again, because Bandcamp doesn't actually differentiate between me sharing it and anyone else sharing it, it's not all the traffic is from me. I'll go away. There we go. You really shout out to you lot. So the contextualization of my music within a broader life that happens on Twitter is really interesting. And this again is one that if you're not the producer of the thing that you're selling, this is a really tricky one to manage. Because I have this kind of market advantage that my personality and my essential being is heavily invested in the product. And trying to do that as a salesperson is really tough. Americans are kind of okay with this. I found this really weird, going to American music trade shows, that someone will be working for one company one year and one company the next year. And they're both really crappy companies, but both times they will come and tell you to your face, they'll go, this is the greatest job I've ever had, this is the most amazing thing I've ever had to sell. And nobody goes, that's clearly bullshit. Because it clearly is. And yet Americans will buy into that. They're willing to suspend disbelief for the purposes of commerce. I don't know if you can get away with that over here. I don't think you could. But I get to, there are so many different aspects to what I do. And they all serve to, I mean, either explicitly or implicitly, serve to funnel people towards the music. The music is the centre of the wheel. So this is all part of a big conversation going on around this VAT law that we're going to talk about probably this afternoon. That I position myself as the musician who's wrestling with this and trying to find answers for other people, which makes musicians grateful to me, and they then go and buy my stuff. The top part of the conversation here is a humanising one. So we go up here, and yesterday was my son's 5th birthday. Where is he? Here we go. So there's a lot of nonsense about being the parent of a 5-year-old. Because a constant stream of a musician saying, hey, buy my stuff, hey, check this out, listen to me. It's just like having narcissism appear in its purest form on the screen. And as soon as you broaden out who you are as a person, as soon as you broaden out what your presentation of self in gospel terms is in that space, you invite people to connect with you in different ways. And so I have a bunch of people, I have an awful lot of Twitter followers who have no interest in my music at all. And I don't penalise them. I don't go, well, I don't care about you because you don't like my music. The music I'm not arrogant enough to believe that everybody should like it. Certainly demographically that wouldn't make any sense as a solo instrumentalist in a world that for the last 80 years, popular music in the West has been controlled by singing and drumming, and I play bass and don't sing. I've already marginalised myself massively. So I take that as a sort of a fun project, but it also means that I understand that I'm not attempting mass market. I'm not taking out adverts on the back page of Q or the NME, because I know that my reach within that demographic is going to be so small that it wouldn't be worth doing. What I can do is build relationships with people. And here's a very interesting encounter. Happened a while back. I put a record out about 2 years ago, which was a duet project with a saxophonist recorded live. And one of the responses was from a guy in Manchester who I don't think I've ever met. I might have met him at a conference at some point, but I don't think we talk quite a lot online, but I don't think I've ever met him. And he tweeted, not directly to me, he tweeted a link to it and said, "At last, Steve has done something I really like." Now, my initial reaction was slightly offended to that. I was like, what? What about the rest of it? But then I realised that actually it's incredibly rare to have someone sat waiting for you to be really good at what you do, waiting for you to connect with them. The normal customer experience is one where when you do something they don't like, they shout and get angry about it. And this guy was already on my side. He was waiting for me to do this. So he was utterly relieved that finally this person that he felt invested in because of the conversation, because he read all my stuff about the music economy and all these kind of tax conversations, finally I'd done a piece of music that he could get behind without feeling like he was selling short the people he was pointing it to. Because he didn't get the rest of what I'd done. It's not that the rest of it was bad, it just didn't fit with what he was about. So I put out this record and he loved it, and he went nuts about it. I telling everybody about it and shared it on Twitter and Facebook. I think he might have even blogged a review. But it was the fact that he listened to successive releases, because in the time from when I met him to that point, I'd probably put out 6 albums. Listening to 5 albums you don't like to get to the one you do, that never happens. If I've heard 5 records by somebody I don't like, I've heard 5 minutes of music by somebody I don't like, I tend never to bother listening to them again. My time's far too precious. There's too much music out there for me to do that. So the fact that this guy had bothered to do that meant that I won. That I had developed a connection with my potential audience, not even just my extant real audience, but a potential audience who for whatever reason I'd failed to connect with, but I built up a rapport with them, and that having that 3-pronged understanding of value that I developed early on, that I developed that to the point where I could break all possible predictable marketing outcomes. Because that just doesn't happen. Nobody does that. Nobody says, "Oh, I went to McDonald's 10 times and it was awful, but next week I'm going again and I really hope they're going to get it right." No, that doesn't happen. That's not a relationship that people have with corporate entities. That's a personal relationship that has, as the denouement of that experience is him going, "Ta-da! I found the thing I like." And that was amazing. But it's also one that, again, unless that when you think about the commercial elements in what I do, I make music. For a while, I was paying other people to master it because I hadn't developed that skill. I then did a mastering course so I could do that myself. The Bandcamp make a cut on what I do. And if someone came to me with an advertising pitch or a marketing pitch that seemed like it would work and was cheap enough for us to experiment with before spending a lot of money on it, I would quite happily work with someone who worked in marketing. But they would need to understand that relationship, the thing that made Paul respond like that, was the key thing. That's what we were trying to funnel people towards. So I don't want a secondary career where I'm having to make up marketing hyperbole about being the world's greatest bass player in order to try and sell it. Because then the people inside that community are going to look at that and go, "What's he doing?" It'd be like your mum going out and claiming that she's the world's greatest. They say, "You're my mum, stop doing that, you're embarrassing me." That's the setup would fall apart because of that. Because the core of the value in what I do, economically and socially, is within that community of people who care about what I do and who I'm talking to on a daily basis. So for them to see me attempting to hype it in an Amazon-esque way, it would do too much damage to that to make that worthwhile. Does that make sense? So there's a sensitivity that would be required from anybody who's coming to me to work in a management or the business management or marketing or e-commerce support role. They would need to understand the primacy of that relationship in order to then help me to design things around it. Because there's lots of room for me to work with other people in this. Like I said at the beginning, I don't have some sort of ideological commitment to working on my own. I get and I get kind of edgy about being the poster child for DIY music, because I think that actually I'm much more interested in scalable infrastructure than I am in the idea of the sole trader as the sort of this key element. But the problem with the music industry traditionally is that it was never that. It was never scalable. It was always about the sort of the spread bet proposition for the record label. They would sign 100 artists, knowing that only one of them was going to make any money, but that the others they could just keep in debt and keep them billing around. Elton John would pay everybody's bills. And I didn't want to be a part of that either, because I was clearly never going to be at that end of the thing, because you heard what I do. It's not Elton John. There's no stadium gig that's going to happen because of this. Any other questions? Right, so there are two more elements to this that I want to get. What time is it? 10 minutes. Okay. Right. The two other tabs on Bandcamp that are interesting. There's this one where I can sell physical merch, and this one where you can subscribe to me for an annual fee. Oh, why is it not open? There it is. Yeah, that's a subscription. We'll come to that last. Let's go to that first. Right. So the physical side of things, there are two things that I do here. One of which I think I might have one with me. Yes. One of which is that I bundle all my work together. The second picture in there. I need to hide it. I bundle all my back catalogue together on a USB stick, for those of you that like vinyl. And that has 27 albums, a 45-minute video, and my novel. 20 quid for subscribers and 25 for non-subscribers. Now that completely destroys our understanding of the unit value of an album. Absolutely wrecks it. I'm able to play on that because I can talk about what a bargain it is. Even though the idea that any digital product has a unit value is ridiculous. It just doesn't fit the economics of it. Because when I was talking about my time making CDs, I had to work out how much I could make off a certain run and the cost of making that run. Once I've finished making a record, the iterative process of distributing that has zero marginal cost. I mean, in macroeconomic terms, it has a cost because everybody has to have a web connection to do it, and bandwidth has a cost. But almost all of that traffic will be marginal, will be within the limits of what people have already paid for. There will be a handful of people who are paying per megabyte data to download my album, but they're statistically insignificant numbers of people. Everybody else is within that margin, so it's functionally ubiquitous. The cost to me of 1 billion people owning that music versus one person owning it is the same. I've made the product, and then the task is building an audience, because you can't market to people who don't know who you are. So I can play on the sense that so this is the great service that iTunes has done to the world, is that their stupid pricing model means that people will look at that and go, oh, 27 albums, that's worth 27 times 8. And they're going to go to that and go, oh, that's 150 quid worth of music. You say, well, no, it's a USB stick. It's 3 quid worth of USB stick. It's not that what's on it doesn't matter. It could have anything on it. There's probably an interesting conversation we've had about Schrodinger and the contents of MP3 discs. Until you plug it in, you don't know what's on there. Could be a dead cat. Could be no music. Try to have this conversation with my H&D students. They didn't get it. But yeah, so it means that I can bundle it together as an incredibly attractive value proposition, and it shows that the vast majority of my audience will go for that. The ones who want to buy something, they're going to look at it and go, I can buy a CD for a tenner. So my CDs are almost bait for people to buy that. I don't expect to sell CDs anymore. Certainly not to people who listen on an iPod or their phone. They're going to go, I can buy that for a tenner, or I can get 27 albums for 25. Well, of course I'm going to do that. So which is classic kind of marketing strategy, that you have, you give people a range of options, and the one that you want them to spend on, everything else is pointing towards that. That those products might exist, you might be not expecting to sell them at all. And you actually, so when people do buy CDs, they buy them because they want me to sign something, and signing that is kind of difficult. But they do that. But also, at the other end, you can download. The finger painting was the combined recordings of a tour that I did with a multi-instrumentalist in California. We did 10 shows together, all of them completely improvised, and we came to put out a CD version. We thought we should put out a CD, because we're kind of old. And listening to it, we went, actually, we sort of need to release all of this. And as a marketing story, that was great. Here's every note we've ever played together, and it's all fantastic. That makes us look really great as musicians. But also, again, it's this thing of being able to bundle 11 hours of music together and sell it for a tenner. Because all I'm doing is emailing people download codes. It's not costing me anything to do that. The music exists. If I was trying to sell each of those albums for £10, I know from the demographic data and my sort of past accounts, the majority of people would buy one album and never come back for the others. But a handful of people would have bought all of them. Very, very small number. But they wouldn't have paid 10. Virtually no one would have paid 10 quid each for them. There's very few people who would have paid £100 for them. And actually those people, I managed to access via a sort of semi-crowdfunding thing that I did, was where I put up a pre-issue version where you could buy it in a tiered way. So you could pre-order the CD, you could order the double CD and the 10 album download set for about 40 quid. But there was a sort of grand producer edition for 130 quid where you've got everything that Daniel and I had done on a USB stick and all of this stuff. And 4 or 5 people went for that, and we made 500 quid, which covered a week of my time in the studio, mixing and mastering it. But because there is this false notion that digital product still has unit value, I mean, the ebooks is the one that makes no sense to me at all. And actually, ebook pricing, the reason for it being where it is at the moment, if you dig into it, is largely because publishers don't want to cannibalize their physical sales, because the cost of production, when a print run drops below a certain figure, the cost of production of a book does that. It's kind of inverse exponential thing. The cost of making one book is enormous. The cost of making 10 books is still pretty high. The cost of making it's something like 2,000 or 3,000 books is the point at which it dips to something that's actually functional. And below that, making books at all is really, really difficult. So the reason that ebooks are as expensive as they are is not because publishers, if their publishers were making just ebooks, they wouldn't be charging that for it. They'd realise that volume would be the key. But what they don't want to do is cannibalise their physical book sales, which is it wasn't until I spoke to somebody publishing about this, because I was ranting about this on Twitter, and they went, yeah, you kind of need to know that it's not a single economy. But for me, I'm happy to cannibalise it, and I'm happy to use that perception that an album that at 45 minutes of music is worth a certain amount, which is meaningless. But I'm willing to use it as a way of people understanding this enhanced value proposition. Because what I'm concerned with is, at the end of the year, how much have I made from the music? The music already exists. I want to be in a position where I can keep making more music. I don't need to try and sell my back catalogue as a retirement fund. I'm not Led Zeppelin or the Eagles, where I'm going to keep trying to repackage things and make people pay for them again. I don't ever want anybody to have to pay for my stuff again. That's nuts. If someone's lost it, then they contact me. I'll just send them all down and go to go, great, just download it. Or get on there and put zeros in. You don't have to buy things again. That's ridiculous. So it's all about giving people the opportunity to pay for things if they want to. And the subscription is the sort of the end point of that. Because if you subscribe to me, this is my initial. It's 20 quid a year. My initial thought was actually 15. Well, I was going to do 15, but the first band in the world to do it, Candy says, I was the second artist on the planet to do this. Yes.
Do you think anybody's ever felt guilty about putting 000?
Yes. Yes, and I get some really. I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. Let me talk do the subscription thing. So Candy says were the first, and they put 20. I was going to put 15. I now wish I had, just because it would have made for a more interesting conversation about what the subscription service was. Because for a while everybody thought that was a fixed price, and it wasn't. And I thought 20. But for that 20 quid, you get all 10 of my completely solo albums, and I guarantee that I'll send you at least 3 albums in the next year. I've got at least 3 finished already, waiting to go, so that wasn't a risk on my behalf. I haven't released the album since it came out. That's the point at which I think it will explode. And I've made about 1,000 quid on this so far. So in sort of material costs, it's paid for me to spend 2 or 3 weeks in the studio making stuff. Because I have a studio at home, so I don't actually have any. I don't have to pay for the studio time. That's paying for my time. So I'm not panicking about paying bills. But this is great because obviously it's rolling, and so whereas all the rest of Bandcamp stuff is PayPal, this is done through Stripe, so you can set up a recurring payment. So in a year's time, they'll get a little note saying, "Do you want to pay for the next year of Steve's work? If you do, don't do anything. If you don't, cancel here. And the assumption is that the majority of people will stick with it because they'll think it's wonderful. That's the plan. It's nice because I like the fact that there's the encouragement in there for me to make good work. Because people go, well, you can just put out any old crap. Well, yeah, and everybody will stop subscribing the following year. We give people 10 really bad records in a year. Everybody's going to get to the end of that year and go, well, that was a waste of time. So actually, the impetus is on me to actually make sure that the value is met and it exceeded. And so that when they come to the following year, yeah, they're going to resubscribe. Can anybody see the one, there's a single big problem that I'm going to have with that value proposition the second year? Can you work out what that is?
You can't offer the back catalogue.
Great, who said that? Yeah, exactly. So the first year, what they're getting is 13 albums. The second year, it's dropped to 3. I'm going to have to work out how to deal with that. That's going to be a problem. So what was the previous question to that? That was a really good one.
Do you think anybody's ever felt guilty
Yes.
about paying zero?
So this is where when I look at my stats, I'll log in this afternoon so you can see it all if you want to have a look at the breakdown. When I look at my stats, if you look at the raw figures on the number of albums that have been downloaded for free versus those that have been paid for, there's a massive skew in favour of free downloads. There are two things that skew that the wrong way. One of which is that whenever I send people download codes and they download them, it shows up as a free thing. So every time someone buys 10 albums and I send them download codes, that looks like it's 10 free downloads, and it's not. It's a sale. But also, what I see happen time and time again is people downloading a number of my albums for free, falling in love with them, back to my earlier point about the uniqueness of music, falling in love with them and then coming back and either paying 40 quid for one album because they're using that single transaction to pay for how they perceive the rest of it, or buying the USB stick or something like that. So and they always message me and say, oh, I've been listening to your stuff for free, I felt it was time I paid for it. So that burden, that sense of them going, and it almost always happens with people who are following me on Twitter or Facebook, that over time they realise that music isn't free in that sort of broad, clumsy sense that all art should be free. That there is an investment of me going into the work, and that changes the value proposition for them. It's not just about downloading some MP3s for free. It's about investing in the ongoing creative output from someone whose work they value. Yep, we'll stop there until this afternoon. Okay, so mull on that. I'm very interested in your perception of how that disrupts what you think of as being the kind of the sort of normal e-commerce product supply chain, payment, fulfillment, where that economy. Does it fit within your model of how that works? Does it disrupt it? Does it change it? Does it make life difficult for people who are acting as middlemen? Does it actually make the job of marketing and sales within that? Does that become an awkward one? Where you haven't just got a product that you're trying to sell and market, but actually you've got this whole attachment to the identity of the person who's doing it. Does it scale? That's the other one. Will this work at scale? Have a think through some of those and come back with some questions and comments. I'll see you this afternoon.